And thanks to Darebin Council, today I'm going to be talking about fruit tree basics. So a few of you were thinking about some fruit that you wanted to add to your garden to go beyond the veggie patch. And that's something we're always excited to talk about, particularly at this time of year when there's a little bit of a chance to plan your orchard ahead. So the best time of year to add fruit trees is just a little bit after now. So when they've gone dormant across the winter period, let's say in a few months' time, that's when you can access bare root trees where you can get lots of different varieties from the nursery, and is a great time of year to add a few fruit trees to your own patch. So as I'm making this video, please do post any questions that you have. I'd love to address those, as well as if you want to hear more about a few different topics, say you're interested in bees or chooks or what veggies you can plant at this time of year, let us know in the comments and we'll try and make videos of those in the coming weeks. We're going to be live here on the 3000 Acres Facebook page at 3 p.m. every Tuesday, talking about different topics to do with your backyard. But on to a little bit about fruit tree basics. So I basically wanted to start off by talking about something that, if you're new to fruit trees, might seem a little bit mysterious, and that's grafting. So when we think of adding a fruit tree to our garden, a lot of people think, oh, well, what if I just planted a seed from my apple and I planted it straight into the ground? Could I get an apple tree that was a lot like the mother? And the case is no, for a range of reasons, one being cross-pollination, and also likely that the mother tree was a grafted variety. So for a long time now, we've been grafting fruit trees so that we can constrain their size, so that we can make them adapt to certain soil conditions, so that we can make them more cold tolerant, for example. And so what that is a process of taking the apple that you want to eat apart from that tree and rootstock from another tree, which has the growing conditions that suit our environment, and grafting or joining together the tree that we want to eat from and the tree that we want the growing conditions of, so that it's able to form a new tree. This allows for us to grow an apple tree that isn't 8 meters high, but 3 meters high, and suits an urban garden. So that combination works really well and is kind of essential when we're thinking about adding fruit trees to our backyard, because we don't want to end up with great big trees in a lot of cases in urban spaces. Something that is smaller, more constrained, is going to be easier to harvest from, easier for us to prune into the shape we want. But on top of that is going to allow for us to do some kind of cool things. Like, for example, graft a tree where there are multiple varieties on the same tree, which is great if you've got a small urban space. Say you only have room for one apple tree, you can have a double grafted variety so that you actually end up getting the cross-pollination you need and 2 different varieties of apples. Pretty cool. So for anyone who's just joining us now, don't forget to comment any questions that you have down below, and I'll try and address them either in the video or answering your questions afterwards. So when you're thinking about what fruit trees you want to add to your orchard, the first question to ask yourself is, what do I eat? Because I've seen enough people add trees that they don't really eat from. I've seen a lot of grapefruits around Melbourne, and there aren't that many grapefruit eaters, for example. So ask yourself some of your favorite things to eat and how much it costs to buy that. For example, one of my favorite fruits is persimmon. They tend to be pretty expensive from the store and kind of hard to get even at this time of year. So that's definitely going on my list for something I want to have my own tree for. Another question to ask yourself is, how much space do I have? For example, everyone in Melbourne is desperate to have an avocado tree. I get that, but you need 2 of them and they're very big trees. So be realistic about the amount of space that you have for your orchard. You might be going for instead something that you're able to get a dwarf variety of. If you're someone who, like I have been for many years, has been renting, then you might want to look at trees that can be grown as a dwarf variety and are comfortable in pots. There are specific trees that work better for that, so you're going to make a different choice. The next question to ask yourself is, are you trying to be self-sufficient? Now, you'd need a little bit more space for this, but if you're someone who's thinking really carefully about getting a harvest every week of the year or every month, then you might be choosing different varieties. And you can actually be enormously self-sufficient with fruit if you very carefully select your varieties so that you have fruit that's ripening at all different times of year. But keep in mind that there are some kind of slower periods in terms of fruit, particularly just the start of spring is a time when not a lot is ripening. And so you have to be really strategic if you want to be harvesting fresh fruit all year round. In terms of thinking about what your trees are going to need, Sun is the big one that people tend to underestimate in urban areas. You've got to make sure that you've got full sun into your garden. If you have a region in your garden that, for example, gets really good sun in spring and summer, but because of how the sun is changing its angle in winter is a little bit shaded in that period, a deciduous tree might do for you. Because remember, when we're talking about different fruit trees, the two main varieties you need to group in your mind are the evergreens that keep their leaves all year round. Think about your citruses. They've still got all of their leaves across winter. Then we have our deciduous trees that lose their leaves and go into dormancy across that winter period. Think about an apple, for example. So those deciduous trees can tolerate a little bit of shading in the winter period. You're, of course, going to need to be able to water your trees. They're going to need good nutrients in the soil. For those of you growing in pots, that means high-quality potting mix. For those growing in the ground, that means preparing the soil in advance. For example, I'm coming to you live from Warrandyte today, which has incredibly rocky clay soil, and it requires a lot of preparation so that fruit trees don't hit some rock or hit that clay soil and find that they have wet feet and get a little unhappy. So you're always going to have to prepare your spot for your fruit trees before you get going. Then on top of that, other than your kind of core requirements, the other thing that your trees are going to require, depending on which one you choose, might be chill hours. That is where a tree needs a certain amount of really cold hours where it's able to set fruit and make sure that you actually get a good harvest. This is less of a factor in Melbourne, where we do get cold winters, but it's something to consider if you're watching this, say, from New South Wales or from Queensland, that trees like cherries and apples often require a certain number of chill hours in order to produce successfully. Trees, in a lot of cases, also need pollinators and cross-pollination. So that is where a tree, in order to produce, needs multiple trees of that same type, but different varieties, so that pollinators are transferring pollen between the trees and ensuring that you get good fruit set. We'll cover that a little bit later. Something else that you might need to consider, particularly here in Melbourne, is protection from frost. We get really excited about a lot of subtropical trees here, and that's great. We are incredibly lucky in Melbourne to be able to grow what has to be one of the widest varieties of fruit in terms of anywhere you can grow. But some of those trees do require a little bit of protection when it gets really cold, or can end up killing the tree. Usually that's just when the tree is young, and it tends to be a little bit more cold tolerant as it gets older. The last question I want you to ask yourself when you're planning your orchard is, how much time do I have? So I'm just going to talk through today some of my top picks for very, very easy trees. But if you're looking at something else, there's something really specific you want, consider for yourself, do you have the time to be doing the pruning, for example, to be protecting it every time there's a frost? I was desperate to try and fit in a lychee tree into my garden, but I decided that I actually didn't want to be running outside and covering it up every time there was going to be a frost, just so that I could maybe get some lychees in 5 years' time. So do ask yourself how much time you have available. So just really quickly, some of my easy to really go-to fruit trees that I would love for you to check out are the things that you would expect, the things that really suit our climate and that you tend to see growing wild around the place. For example, figs. If you live in the inner north, you have seen some wild, uncared for figs that no one's touched for years but still produce a good crop. That's because figs are very, very tolerant of the Melbourne environment. They get spread easily by the bats coming out of Yarra Bend Park, and so you see a lot of them springing up all over the place. Figs need very little care once established. They don't demand really nice soil, and you can actually get yourself a fig for free. Find a fig tree in your neighborhood that you like the taste of when we get into the end of winter, let's say July, thereabouts, before it comes out of dormancy. Take a cutting from that fig, just about 4 nodules along the branch, stick it in some nice potting mix, and you'll find that that fig will sprout for you, so that you're able to actually end up with a tree that will grow very happily in a pot. Figs are big trees. They get their roots into everything, but you can constrain that by keeping them in a pot, or at least planting them far enough away from your house. Please don't hold me responsible if you plant a fig right next to your house. It will not have a happy ending. Other really easy trees for here in Melbourne are the pomegranate. They come from a Mediterranean climate. They don't mind our Mediterranean climate here in Melbourne, so they can be really successful in a pot as well. Locusts, which you see growing around in a lot of places around Melbourne. They're very popular. I describe them as kind of like a less flavorsome apricot, but quite delicious, and they fruit at a really convenient time of year. The other one on here is olives, which are probably fresh in your mind at this time of year because there are so many olive trees around Melbourne that need to be harvested. If you're interested in learning how to preserve olives, we're doing a bunch of workshops on that in coming weeks. Please do sign up because there's a lot of olives along streetscapes, in public parks that need to be harvested, and we would love to see you learning how to make use of those olives at one of our workshops. So those are my top picks for very easy fruit trees that I do recommend you giving a go. And other than the locust, which gets kind of big, these three, the fig, the pomegranate, and the olive, can all be happy in a pot if you choose the right variety and carefully prune. So I don't have too much more time, but I did want to say, if anyone is out there listening, say from a renting perspective, or because you're just getting into this and you're not sure about fruit trees yet, some other fruit that you can consider that aren't trees are, of course, our raspberries, which grow on canes. So like a vine coming out of the ground that grows about 1.5 meters high. Strawberries, which grow on small bushes. Blueberries, which grow on big bushes, more like 1.5 or 2 meters tall. As well as some of the vining fruit that we can grow successfully in Melbourne. That would be kiwi fruit, kiwi berry, as well as a much easier self-pollinating variety. So kiwi berry tastes like a small, sweet berry-like kiwi. I'm obsessed with them at this time of year. And as well as passion fruit. So passion fruit is a short-lived perennial. That means it'll produce for you for maybe about 5 years in Melbourne. My mom's growing here in Warrandyte produced about 200 passion fruits this year, so I can highly recommend it for productivity. And the last one on there would be melons. Watermelons, cantaloupe, honeydew, delicious. It's a summertime annual crop. So you would plant them in about October, November, and then be harvesting them across the summer. So I'll just end it there, but please do post any questions that you have about fruit trees, growing fruit in your garden below. I'll try and comment back in the next week, but also let us know, what would you like the next video to be on? I'd be happy to chat about bees, show you a tour of the hive, to take you on a tour of the garden here and talk about what's growing. So let me know what sort of things would be helpful in your garden, and I'll make sure to include that. For anybody living in the city of Darebin, please do make sure to show us all of your gardening adventures using the hashtag Darebin Backyard Harvest, and we would love to share them with the 3,000 Acres crew. So everybody out there who's looking for new recipes and stories in this time of isolation to learn a little bit more about their garden, please do give us a shout out. All right, all the best. Thanks for joining.